Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Am I on? I'm Ben Hillman, chair of the microscopic but mighty Town of Sheffield Democratic Committee. Thank you. And the first announcement is that unfortunately Jamie Minacci could not be here tonight because of health reasons, and we all wish her a speedy recovery. And I would like to, first of all, thank Dewey Hall for letting us have their magnificent space, CTSB for filming this, and everyone here who supported the Sheffield Democratic Committee and our committee members. But the big announcement for tonight, and this is huge, is that by unanimous consent, the Town of Sheffield Democratic Committee has endorsed Kamala Harris for president. This could actually swing the election. As goes Sheffield, so goes the country, as people have said. So you'll probably hear about this all over the national news tonight. But I wanted you to know first. So, and just one more word about these events. We are the Democratic Committee, so we are only featuring Democrats, and I understand there are people from other parties running, and hopefully some other organization will give them a forum as well. But that's why we are exclusively here to promote Democrats. And we do not endorse any candidate, Democratic candidate, in a primary, which means we love you all equally.
Oh, that's sweet.
So to start off, Lee Davis and Patrick White, and each one will give an introduction, and then afterwards we will be taking questions. Thank you. Lee, you want to start?
Yes, sure. First of all, best wishes to Jamie. I hope she recovers quickly and is healthy soon. So we're thinking of you, Jamie. Thank you so much to the Sheffield Dems, and thank you to Dewey Hall. This is such an awesome place. I love it. It actually looks a lot smaller with lots of people, sitting. I'm usually dancing, so it's actually, but it's such a beautiful place and historic, and there's so much that Sheffield has to offer, but Dewey Hall is definitely the central part of it. So I'm going to give you a little bit. I'm going to talk like a half hour because you said Jamie's not there, so I can. No, I'm kidding. So first of all, Kamala, yes. Okay. I'm so psyched. I'm trying to get a ticket, so if anyone has a ticket, I'm willing and able, good-bodied. So I'm going to give a little bit of background so you understand that what I bring to the role of a state rep is really immersed in my values and immersed in my experience. So for those that have heard my sad story of the snowstorm, I apologize. So in 2007, New Year's Eve, I was a lecturer in Ireland. I was teaching there for 12 years. I was a solo parent to 3 kids. I had a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. I had been married to an Irishman. My parents had passed away, and I went to my home in D.C. and closed up the house and took a couple days off. And I always wanted to see the Berkshires. It reminded me of Ireland. And I was on a kind of a destiny, and I decided to stop by Great Barrington to get a coffee. And I ended up in Fuel, actually. And I got stuck in a snowstorm. And I was forced to stay overnight in the Days Inn. Now it's the Quality Inn. And the next morning, because I couldn't move my car, I walked and ended up at Lake Mansfield. And snow was falling, and families were ice skating, and kids were pulling sleds, and I fell in love with this community. I didn't know it. I didn't have a job. I didn't have family. But the community was something that just drew me in. So I walked down and saw Wheeler and Taylor, and I said, I'm going back to Ireland tomorrow, but if a fixer-upper in this neighborhood with a lake comes up, let me know. Went back to Ireland, and they called me, and a year later I moved here, and it was a leap of faith. So I had 3 kids and didn't know what to do. I was had a teaching position, but I wanted to raise my kids. So I threw myself into the community. I started volunteering because I was an advocate for my parents through hospice. The first place I volunteered for was hospice care in the Berkshires. So I spent many hours at Fairview Commons sitting with patients. And this was even before I had a job. At the same time, I was enrolling my kids in Muddy Brook and over in early childhood at the Steiner School. And I started an errands service business, so Errands by Lee. So again, I needed to be able to balance being a mother, having kids in school, and being home. So I had errands service. I started writing for the Berkshire Record. I had a column called "Are We There Yet?" I don't know if anyone remembers that. They started putting my picture in, and people would stop me in Big Y and say, "Are you okay?" Because I'd be talking about looking for work and. I was just really immersed. So through this column, actually, through the Berkshire Record, after 5 years of doing the Berkshire shuffle, right, juggling multiple jobs to live here, figuring out childcare, figuring out how I'm going to actually, make a living, I said, I'm going back to Ireland. I was fortunate to have a tenured position, and my job was held for 5 years. And my last column was goodbye, Berkshires. It was nice, but I'm going back. And so there was a board member at the Mahawi, and I didn't know he was a fan of my column. And he called Beryl Jolly, who was the executive director, and we met in Fuel. And I said, "Nice to meet you." And I was offered a job as a marketing director, and it worked into my background. So I had been, in the film profession. I was a film editor previously. I worked in Los Angeles. And so performing arts and culture was in my soul. So I worked there for 5 years. Again, putting my kids through school. Then the Berkshire Eagle had new local investors. And so I went to work with them. They poached me. And I did that for a year. And then I was ready for something else. I was very interested in housing. And I was approached by a developer. They were trying to revitalize the historic paper mill in downtown Lee, Eagle Mill. And the developer thought I had what it took. He really believed that, I had the ability to learn quickly on my feet, that I had the passion for housing, that I had the learned experience, and I was the development director of Eagle Mill, $80 million revitalization. So one of my first tasks was looking at West Center Street and looking at all the homes there with people living in these homes, and I had to rehome them. I had to go through each and every single townhouse and have relationships with these people and say, we're going to be demolishing your house. So Kathy Hall is one of my biggest supporters, and the Hall family, they'd been living there for, I think, over 70 years. And through these relationships and through raising money, I was able to bring $30 million into the project. I worked with MassWorks. I worked with the state. I worked with the federal government. So we got historic commission loans. We got, infrastructure loans. I worked and, getting money for a revamp of the water mains bill. So this was kind of a combination of building relationships and actually economic development, driving economic development in downtown Lee. So through this, then COVID hit, and I was paid on an independent consultant, and I lost my job. So here I am, 3 kids, about to go to college, and I started from the ground up again. And the reason why I'm going into this is that I understand the hardships that people are going through. I understand what it's like to have kids that need to go to childcare. I understand what to be on SNAP. I know what it's like to be on WIC. I know what it's like, to have 1 kid or 1 car and 4 people driving. So this is, the values that I bring to being a state rep. I'm not just all about numbers and policies. I'm actually living what you're experiencing. So I went from really being a director of development to Construct. They said they needed a director of development. They thought I had what it took to raise money for the largest affordable housing nonprofit in the Southern Berkshires. So I began raising money for Construct, and I was very, very grateful to be provided an opportunity to start looking at workforce housing. They had never done workforce housing at that time. The Windflower came up, and I pitched it to the board, and I said, yes, affordable housing is important, but we need workforce housing. We need, the missing middle, the people that, don't qualify for subsidized housing, but actually are working in our community. So thank goodness we were able to pull it together. We raised money very quickly, and we purchased the Windflower Inn. And now we have 13 units, and we have 13 people living there. And what's so beautiful about it is it's intergenerational. Okay, it's not just shift workers. It's people in their 70s, people in their 60s, people that want to downsize, that they don't have the money to downsize. There's no housing available. So again, it's all about community. It's all about working together and finding those creative solutions. And through Windflower, we're working with Tri-Town Connector. So how do we get the people that are living in the Windflower to get to work? So now we have this wonderful opportunity that we're working with another, local community effort to make sure that people that are living in Windflower have transportation to get to their jobs. So this is kind of a long-winded way of telling you that I am locked in. And many of you know that I'm the vice chair of the select board. This is my 5th year as the vice chair, coming into my 6th year as a select board member. I'm the chair of the housing subcommittee. We passed a very, very important short-term rental bylaw, which I wrote several years ago. And what that did was that helped bring down some of the pressures between long-term housing and short-term rentals. And so what we did is I fought very, very hard to provide a firewall so that the people that wanted to invest and to flip houses, they weren't taking our housing away from people that wanted to live here and work here. So I put together a proposal that we had, one short-term rental and that we made sure that corporations didn't come. So that's a little bit about the background that I've been doing as a vice chair of the select board, as a chair of the committee. And I will say, before I give it to Mr. White here, that I will be around for questions. Obviously, we'll have a wrap-up. But my values are informed by my experience and my passion and my detail to numbers, to really getting in on the efforts that matter in this community. So thank you very, very much, and I will give it to my colleague here.
Thank you, Lee. Mr. White.
My name is Patrick White, but before I start, I wanted to say a few words about Jamie Manassi, who couldn't be here tonight because I think she's ill. I've sat next to her for 2 years. And in that time, and actually the time before, for the last 4 or 5 years, Jamie worked one of the hardest jobs I know. She works with a severely autistic child at Lennox High. And to do volunteer work on a board like ours, while you're doing that kind of work day in and day out, I think that we should all appreciate what Jamie brings to the table. I think we've got 4 great candidates, and whoever you choose, I don't think you can go wrong. So now I'll make the case for me. I want to tell you a little bit about my background, a little bit about my work in the Berkshires, and then a little bit about some of the things I want to do if I get elected to this job. I want to start with Sheffield, though, and it was 251 years ago that the Sheffield Resolves were written. 251 years ago, and this was the cradle of democracy. This informed Boston about with the work that John Adams and others were doing before the Declaration of Independence was written. That informed Thomas Jefferson. And I think right now with some of the challenges we have in democracy, some things kind of never change. But I think that the work that Sheffield has done throughout its entire existence is really important. And I'll get back to that in a minute and talk about some of the work that I've done. I was born here. I'm going to be buried here. In between, I lived in Boston sometime. I basically spent my life between the Berkshires and Boston. My parents moved here in 1957. My dad got a job with General Electric. My mom worked as a chambermaid for Wheatley. They all had second gigs. My mom worked at the Lennox package store a little while, and my dad ran the rink. Before Shakespeare and Company was Shakespeare and Company, it was a hockey rink. In fact, I was at the Sheffield Historical event about a month ago. Yeah, the garden party, and someone came up to me and was like, "Your dad was my hockey coach," and yeah, so he was a hockey coach at Monument. I went to Monument, graduated from Monument. I think that we've got I ended up in Boston because I went to Boston College. I stayed. I started a little graphic design studio when I graduated. Ended up with the BSO and Boston Ballet and John F. Kennedy Library and some other clients. Did a couple of tech startups in Boston. Raised some millions of dollars with some venture capital companies. And I think that experience kind of informed a lot of the executive experience I think I have and that I bring to the table here. I think it also informs, frankly, the kind of start on day one issue. I know lots and lots of people in Boston. I was working for many, many years in Boston. I have contacts, civic contacts, government contacts, nonprofit contacts, and the kind of contacts that you need to be effective on day one in that city. Very comfortable with that city. In fact, I lived on Beacon Street for a number of years. Coming back to the Berkshires, I volunteered for the Conservation Commission. I volunteered for a local land trust where I ended up being the vice president and treasurer. I ended up running for the select board in 2020. I got elected to the select board. My first try, I think that the role of government has really got two parts to it. It's on the one hand aspirational, and on the other hand practical. So I'm going to start with the aspirational. I think it's really important to have a project or two that you're going to focus on that is thinking big, that is swinging for the fences. And I've had the pleasure of having a couple of those. One is working with the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohicans. When I first got elected, there was we found some documents in town hall that had the sons of Conkapot and Umpacheen's signatures on it. And I'll tell you, most of the Mohicans back in the day, they lived in Sheffield and they lived in Stockbridge. In fact, Stockbridge originally was called Indiantown. And the board I sit on right now, the select board, the first one had 2 Mohicans and 1 settler. And that is the exact same board, from 1739 that I sit on now. And so first I worked with the delegation to pass a state law because you can't give back documents that are not that are town documents from before 1870. We got that passed. Then the state contacted me about a year later and said, we want to open up the land grant program of the Municipal Vulnerabilities Program to make it available to indigenous tribes. We want to start with the Mohicans, and we want to start in Stockbridge because that's where they were with Indiantown. That's where they were headquartered. So we found some land. We got that deal done. We raised $2.5 million of 351 acres at the base of Monument Mountain. I proposed that we start the Stockbridge Mohican Commission. I also, importantly, proposed to the Berkshire County League of Sportsmen, the hunting and fishing clubs, that we think about fishing trips. Most of the Mohicans have never been here. They're a relatively modest community, frankly poor community out in Wisconsin, where they ended up. And so we're bringing together some folks who maybe aren't necessarily completely agree with the politics of this crowd in this room, being sort of sportsmen, somewhat. And the reason I reached out to them because I think that things like reconciliation can't be echo chambers. I think that we have to work hard to build consensus around some of these issues. Another project, Swinging for the Fences project I was involved in, was Ice Glen. I first got elected 2020. Somebody pointed out to me, there may be a problem with woolly adelgid, with the hemlocks. I also happen to know that there's only 1,200 acres in private hand, non-Massachusetts hands, of old-growth forest left in this entire state. Something like 7 million acres. There's only 1,200 left, but some of them are in Stockbridge. So I invited a guy named Bob Leverett to walk the forest with me because, frankly, I don't know a lot about trees, or at least I didn't back then. And Bob was on the cover of Smithsonian Magazine 2 years ago as the foremost expert on old growth. He lives in the Northampton area. So he brought in a guy named Ken Gooch. Ken was the head of forestry health at DCR. And they said, you've got 400-year-old ash trees here, and you've got 300-year-old hemlocks here, about 400 trees total. That is a stand of old growth, and they'll all be dead within 3 years if you don't deal with this right now. Ash dies faster because if the ash borer gets them, it eats them like this, it turns out. So within the same year, and if you do any work for towns, getting things budgeted outside of the normal budget cycle is really hard. We got that done. We got an emergency appropriation through the Finance Committee and the Select Board. We treated those trees. We've saved that forest. And that informed some of the work that we're doing right now down here in South County. Yeah, I saw Eleanor in the room, who is the head of Green Berkshires, and she's working real hard to save the cattle barn property down in Mount Washington, which is actually an important feeder for the water source in Negremont. And we're working to try to convince DCR to pause some logging on those. On that property as we explore what the impact will be, especially in the context of climate change. Based on my work with Mohicans and the work on the forest, I actually got named to the Community Climate Advisory Board for the state. I think that tonight we're going to talk about housing. We're going to talk about roads and bridges and infrastructure. On housing, I ran on housing. Stockbridge is one of only 2 communities in the Berkshires that is at its 10% threshold that the state requires. I still said we should have a housing trust. I wrote the housing trust documents. I wrote the residential inclusionary bylaw that funds that housing. And I got 90% of the voters at town meeting to agree with me that even though we didn't need to do it, it was the right thing to do. On roads and bridges, on my first term, my first year in that term, I said I want to see every road paved. I want to see every bridge maintained. We had 8 bridges that were out. We've actually completed repairs on 4 of them. We have 3 in engineering now with a plan that is funded to fund them. We have 1 that the state just closed. We got a lot of old infrastructure around here. Fact is that we've come up with a plan within 2 months of the state closing that bridge. We had a plan in place with 3 engineering options for us to take a look at to keep those open. Because the role of government, I love the aspirational stuff. Save the forest, bring the Mohicans back, as I gesticulate. But there's a practical side to government that we're going to have to focus on. Another is ambulance. It's ambulance and EMS. We reached out to the town of Lee, Michael Canales and I. I went to those meetings. We've now reached out to the towns of West Stockbridge and Stockbridge. We've got aging fire departments. We've got aging ambulance squads, and we're going to need to figure out how we professionalize those departments. Because I say professional, they're already professional, but they're volunteer. We're going to need full time, and these are all things that impact the tax burden. Every single one of these things that we're looking at as towns. We've got towns in this district. Dalton tells me, Tom tells me up there that they need $20 million in road repairs. Adding professional ambulance can easily add 5 or 10% to our town's budget, but we know we're going to have to do it. If ambulance gets there in 6 minutes, you save a life. If it gets there in 20 minutes, somebody dies. This is the primary role of government, is public safety. So I'm of the opinion, and what I'll try to bring to Boston is you swing for the fences and you try to get the big giant things done. The Mohicans left 200 years ago when the women and children couldn't keep, I don't know if you knew this, but most of the Mohican men volunteered, just like the people in Sheffield did, for the Continental Army. And in one battle, almost all of them died in southern New York. And the women and children were left in poverty. They ended up having to mortgage their homes. They lost their homes in the late 1700s and early 1800s, and that's why most of them ended up going eventually to New York and eventually to Wisconsin. I love 200 years later reconciling that history. But let's face it, the role of government here is your needs. It's the needs of the people who are here right now, and I hope to bring the energy and compassion and perspective to both do the big things and do the workaday role of governing that we're going to need in Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Now we're going to open up the floor for questions. You can ask one or the other or both.
No one? I guess we can go.
Yes, sir.
I wonder how each of you feels about Senate 2838. It's a recently passed law, as I understand it, that provides a somewhat streamlined process for solar arrays at scale. It's a sensitive matter. There are important points of view on both sides of that. Mm-hmm. We live in a
place where we don't want to make mirrors out of our meadows, but we also share a worldwide need to update our infrastructure and make energy from renewable sources. So I haven't read the law. I know that the Berkshire's senator feels that the protections for local control in Senate 2838 are adequate, but I wonder what you think.
Is that part of the climate omnibus bill, or was that separately passed? Okay. Is it? Okay. So, one of the things about government, and it's so important to realize that, the two of us are coming from a select board role and moving into a legislator role. So there's two very, very separate job descriptions that we do. And with the omnibus, it's a moving target. So we have the end of the legislative session, July 31st, and unfortunately, things always get done the last month for some reason, which I'd love to change. So transparency and accountability, trying to keep track of all these bills that a lot of times are wrapped up in the omnibus bill. So so in regards to you, I would be tracking bills like you, and I do track bills, and then when it's part of the omnibus, there's a lot of wheeling and dealing that goes on in conference committee. And is it in? Is it out? But Senator Paul Mark is a wonderful, wonderful role model of mine, a dear friend. And, if you're saying that he's okay with the language, we don't know what the language is actually going to be until it gets to the governor's desk. And hopefully it'll pass. It's been a year and a half that they've been working on this climate omnibus bill, right? So it's imperative that we do something. Local control is huge, and I know there's different solar projects. There's small scale, and then there's large scale. So how do they define small scale and large scale? We have to wait and see. But from what I know is, the permitting process and the siting process, that's something that Governor Healy is paying attention to, and she needs to pay attention to. And wrapped up in that is local control, right? So how much local control are we going to have? The state, wants to really get to that net zero emissions by 2050, and I can understand that and I support that, but not at the expense of local communities having, like you said, mirrors on their mountains, right? So I've been talking to farmers about this actually because I'm really interested in the dual role of solar on farmland. Because there's this whole movement of, we have all this open space and farmland. What if we put these, solar panels and you can still farm underneath? So it sounds like kind of an interesting thing. You can get two things for one price. But the problem with that is, what happens when they become obsolete? In 10 years, 20 years, so the farmers might get subsidies, right? They try to make it like, oh, we want you to build more solar. We want you to put solar on your fields and look at all the money. But then, the farmers are left holding the bag. So I think what's really, really important in this bill, and if it is an omnibus bill, is to advocate that we have local control, that, we have a say on the municipal level. We have a say on a regional level that, we are the ones that determine that. And that is a key point of mine, local control. For those of you know my experience with going toe-to-toe with Suffolk Downs at the fairgrounds. When I read a piece of legislation, my second month on the select board, asked about the fairgrounds and found out that a commercial horse racing entity was moving into Great Barrington without the residents knowing about it. And what that was about was local control, the loss of local control. In this bill, there was a loophole put in by lobbyists from Suffolk Downs that basically took the local control out of the role of the resident. So any kind of piece of legislation, you need to I'll finish that thought about. I took that all the way to home rule petition with a hardworking group of advocates. And I sat beside Smitty Pignatelli and spoke in front of the Committee on Consumer Protection and Commercial Licensure. And I said, we need local control. So whatever is in this bill, and if it comes out through the omnibus bill, I will fight to make sure that we have local control.
Mr. White.
Well, we've already lost it. I mean, the bill includes, just like you're saying, it includes an override of of most local control on the siting of solar. They're putting it to Boston. I lived in Boston a long time. So many of the people have never even been here. They've never even heard of here. They've never even heard of Tanglewood. Many have, but a lot of them haven't. So I think that let's talk a little bit about climate. I mentioned I'm on the state's Community Climate Advisory Board. I believe, as Lee does, that the getting to net zero, getting the carbon goals passed by 2050 is an important benchmark. That said, I believe that we're somewhere around 25 gigawatts of clean energy now, and the goal is to get to 50. And for every one of those, you need 2,000 to 3,000 acres of solar. Okay, start to do the math. All right. One of the challenges we have out here is we don't have a lot of juice. I mean, that's the reality. There's 19 state reps from Boston. I think I lived in 2 or 3 of their districts when I was there. There's one for 18 towns out here. And so I get really, really nervous when folks from the eastern part of the state who really don't know these parts start to say you're not going to get a say the way that you had a say. And I wonder if taking away that say, which might have delayed a project a year or two, in the grand scheme of things, really would have made a huge difference, but allows a lot of streamlining and allows a lot of folks to basically sit in an office in Boston and say, we're going to do this. So I think we're going to have to work really hard to make a case. And you know what? The solar's going to have to go somewhere. And Paul Mark had a good idea that didn't pass this session, which was start with the brownfields. We got a lot of those, all right? People maybe have put some stuff on land, it's fallow land, all right? You've got, the low-lying areas. You've got solar on roofs. Even if you put solar on every single roof in Massachusetts, it only gets you a third of the way of what you need in terms of solar generation to meet our climate goals. The realities of the numbers are not great in terms of forests. So now what we have is we got a couple other things that we need to look at. Because frankly, this is an area that is heavily dependent on tourism. So maybe we need to make a case for why in this district, we need to be cognizant of the fact that people come here for the beauty, and that's really an integral part of the economy of this area, and make a case for that. We also can, if we're going to, there's a little bit of horse trading maybe. I mentioned the cattle barn property down in Mount Washington. Okay, folks, let's maybe stop cutting so many trees with the logging interests. If we're going to have to cut some of these forests, for solar. Now, there's a lot of different types of forests. You've got not so much with the old growth, but you have a lot of first growth. You have a lot of mature forests. Then you've got a lot of forests that, I've got Hans Morris in Boston. I'm sorry, in Stockbridge donated, 20-acre parcel for affordable housing. All right, that's mostly invasives now because the people owned it before him logged all the hardwood and then they logged all the pine, and then they sold it to Hans, who ended up giving it to the town. All right, well, it's kind of like it takes 200 years to grow a mature forest, so it's not so great shape. And that maybe is a good parcel for affordable housing, or something like solar. In fact, it's right next to the Stockbridge solar field. So kind of figuring out how we partner with this new state agency is going to be really, really important. And I feel like, we want to keep emphasizing that you want to start with the worst land and preserve the best land. And the idea that we've got a whole lot of mountains with a whole lot of cheap land out here because, it's hard to develop mountainsides around here really worries me, because cheap land and a really hungry state government together is with relatively little political power. It just worries me a little bit. So, thanks.
I just have a quick question. How much does offshore wind, which is a massive amount of energy, which is going to be coming down the pike, lessen the demand for land use for solar?
I couldn't answer that without really doing the research, so I'm not going to answer that.
Look it up.
Yeah.
Look, I will. I will. I'll get my little notepad and.
Yeah. But I will. I do think though that this goes to the heart of what the job is, because I'd love offshore if it protects a single forest in the Berkshire County. The job of this person is to represent your interests. All right, and I'll tell you this: when I have a belief like in things like climate, and if I have to choose, well, it's really rare in government that you have to choose between competing interests. In terms of like your core values. But I'll tell you this: the job of the state rep is to represent your interests in this district. I'm not going there to solve. I know the problems in Boston. I lived there a long time. I'm not going there to solve Boston problems. I'm not going there to feed energy for the millions of people who live in eastern Massachusetts. I'm going there to protect the interests of the 40,000 people in this district.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Yes.
Talking about interests, my passion is about plastic pollution, packaging, unnecessary plastic packaging, the bottle bill, which I know is probably coming up in the climate omnibus bill. How much are you interested in that issue?
So in Great Barrington, we very fortunate to have the leadership of Jenny Clark and some students that brought forth a bill that we were trying to take the effect of plastic, and so now you have to bring recyclable and renewable bags in Great Barrington. So we were very, very progressive in terms of that. Was that you too? Is that what you're? Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were saying me. And that is a really good step in the direction. I think the state is now realizing that the state needs to take the leadership and not literally just each town. So I'm really glad that that's part of, hopefully, the omnibus bill, in addition to increasing the return for bottles from 5 cents to 10 cents, and including water bottles, including wine bottles. So I really think that the government is, Governor Healy and Driscoll, the administration, is really paying attention to the effect of plastics. It seeps in. So it's not just plastics that we see on trees. It's plastics that we're ingesting, the PFAS. So I really feel that you have progressive communities such as Barrington. I'm not sure if Sheffield has a plastic, what your bylaws here, but I really think that it's important that the state takes leadership on that, and I'm glad we have an administration that is taking that seriously, and I'm going to be watching what comes out of the climate omnibus bill and what's actually signed, and that the fight's not over. So what I learned in legislation and having really studied what it's like to be a legislator is that you might lose the fight now, but then then a new session starts. So there's certain things that I wanted in the Affordable Homes Act, which might not be in there, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up the fight. So I think if we have experts in the field, if we have passionate activists, grassroots groups that say this should be amended, you should fight for this, you should co-sponsor this piece of legislation and get together with your Berkshire delegates and say this is actually an issue that the Berkshires cares about. So that's what I would be doing, and I'm feeling very, very confident that we're moving in the right direction, but certainly more work needs to be done.
One of the most brilliant Madison Avenue campaigns was produced for polluters about, I think it was 40 years ago when I was a kid. Maybe a young adult, I don't know. It was the Native American crying when this person was polluting on the side of the road. And that was all about shifting the burden of pollution from producers to consumers. It was all about that, and it was so brilliant. You saw the people polluting, and you saw the Native American crying about his homeland, getting polluted, and that was a brilliant effort to keep the accountability for pollution out of the hands of the polluters. And I am sick and tired of that. I am. The fact is that packaging companies should pay for the cost of pollution and the cost of the pollution they produce. The over and over again, we have seen here in the Berkshires what the true human environmental cost is of pollution. All right? I grew up in Stockbridge, and the Houstonic River winds its way through Stockbridge. And I told the story about my friend Steve Rose. He and I used to shag balls on the Houstonic because the Stockbridge golf course is right there. And we'd get like a quarter of a ball. So we'd go into the river, wade into the river, we'd get the balls, we'd bring them out, we'd clean them up, like, and this is important, and then we would sell them back to the golfers, all right? My friend Steve Rose died of a rare form of throat cancer, and so did his neighbor, all right? Not in the same household, all right? Adam, Bob Jones and I invited, I know there's debates about second homeowners, primary homeowners, all the rest of it. We get a lot of great second homeowners who are actually really accomplished, and some of them are NIH scientists. And in March, a couple of them live in Stockbridge, and also, so Bob Jones and I invited some folks I knew to talk about the Rest River settlement, talk about polluters, talk about pollution, packaging, all of this are kind of related, all right? And they pointed out that the GE was trying to pull a fast one. They were only tracking these microns for the aerosolized particles down to 10 microns, and the current science is 2.5 microns. And we filed that, and if you read the Eagle last week, the EPA actually agreed with us and changed the guidance on the documents that they have. All right. The fact is that holding these polluters accountable is absolutely critical. And the thing they understand at these big companies is money. They understand money. And I'll tell you this, we've got to make it so expensive for them to pollute that they stop polluting. That is the only thing they understand. And I don't care whether it's paying for the cost of pollution in terms of packaging or paying for the impact on the historical impacts of their practices on the people and the environment of the Berkshires. I think we got to start holding these folks accountable. One of the things that Tom Finan, who's an oncologist who just retired from BMC, he came from Yale to work as an oncologist at BMC, told us in that meeting was that they have a huge data bank at BMC of all these bizarre, rare cancer, aggregated data on all of these cancers that we've had here in the Berkshires. And boy, I think one of the priorities we have to have as a community is to get those class action lawsuits going. I know that, that Sheffield settled for $1.5 million. Stockbridge settled for $1.5 million. The cost of, Great Barrington settled for $1.5 million. That is not nearly enough. And I hope that the people who have suffered in these communities band together and make these companies pay, because it's the only lesson we can teach them, because the only thing they understand is money. Thank you.
One second. You talked about the consumer end with plastic bags, and you talked about the producing end of the people who create plastic. What would you do about the people in the middle, like the supermarkets, who are using more and more plastic packaging to make them transition?
Look at it. If you want to, I'm sorry.
No, I was just, I'm thinking about NIPS, and we are going to have this discussion in Great Barrington, and I'm at the point that I'm listening. I'm talking to package store owners. I'm talking to health experts. Talking about alcoholism. I'm talking about the reality of if NIPS were to go, what would be the long-term effects. But NIPS are plastic, and they're disposable, and they're cheap, and they're contributing to our crisis with the climate. Mm-hmm. So that is a perfect example of really where you have the tension of the consumers, the owners of a package store, and standing up for the climate and saying this needs to stop. We need to ban plastic bags. We need to ban. So that's actually a really, really good example. So I am, having a lot of conversations, and that's just something that came to the forefront. And it's interesting with these conversations, you look at the health side of it. So you look at the plastic, and you look at how people are ingesting plastic, and you have cancers. And then you're looking at the people that are saying they're going to lose their jobs, and the workers are going to lose their jobs. And, people depend on NIPS because it's, 50% of their whatever. So, I'm always trying to find the best solution for the community. And sometimes you need to make tough decisions. But the most important thing is to have these conversations, try to find a balance, but stick to your values and, stick, like what Patrick was saying, there is actually a bill called Pay Polluters Bill right now. There's a piece of legislation there, and I'm actually, following it very, very closely, and it's looking at targeting the top 20 Superfund, corporations that part of these Superfunds. So there is actually a piece of legislation circling around the State House about polluters pay bill. But what I am saying is that, yes, there's you have to look at the big picture, and you need to have this hard conversation. So,
just to echo that, look at supermarkets. You don't want food. Regulation, costs come with regulation. I think that when it impacts folks of modest means or poor, and on really fundamental things like food, I think we have to work on education, and recognize that's an area to be at least sensitive about regulation. You can't have food be that much more expensive in a situation where so many folks struggle with the most basic, costs that we have in the society. So, I think one of the things we all should be doing is staying away from the middle of the supermarket and shopping from the edges of the supermarket. You tend to consume less packaging if you do that. So we get into food deserts. Food is a really complicated issue. So just to answer your question on food, I think that we should show some caution, just because it is inflation. Inflation is an average number. My background is economics. Inflation is an average number. The inflation around some of the impacts on the poorest among us have been much more significant, and I think we just have to track what those impacts are going to be. That said, buy fresh vegetables and bring your own reusable packaging to store them in. Thanks.
Thank you. Other question? All the way in the back.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Brittany Ebling. I live here in Sheffield, and I'm the Deputy Director at Berkshire Environmental Action Team, and my partner and I also have a small farm here. My question is about your learning methodology. As in my professional capacity, we often work with legislators. We've heard that the role of a representative is often to be a mile wide but an inch deep on 1,000 different issues. So I wonder if you could give some examples of a moment in your tenure as a select board member or in different capacities you've engaged in the community about how you have educated yourself or come to engage with community groups on an area of expertise that you had no prior knowledge of, perhaps scientific or otherwise niche information. Thank you.
That is a great question. Thank you so much for that. So the role of farmers and the roles of housing. I am so fascinated and supportive of the community land trusts and what is happening with the Berkshire Community Land Trust, what's happening with Sheffield, with conservation. So you have this wonderful balance and partnership of supporting farmers, supporting small-scale farmers, and building affordable housing so it's kept affordable in perpetuity. And that is something that I've been talking to Susan Witt and, traveling and talking to the Green Agers and Will Conklin and, admiring the work that Jane Iredale has been doing in terms of her philanthropy, helping to get the River Run project off the ground. And, they're still raising money. And this is a wonderful thing that, for me, when you think about a third of our land in Berkshire County is undevelopable, right? So that doesn't have a price tag. Like the state doesn't see that as an economic engine, right? But the thing is, we give something by having our open space that we treasure, right? The forests and the open space and the grasslands and the farms, we are contributing something. And, I talk about, how to monetize the beauty we have here. How do we monetize that so that it's worth something to the state? So when, if I were to be a state representative, I said, well, we care about preserving our land. We care about making sure that our small scale farmers can actually live on the land that they work, right? But we need money. And so we need to convince the State House that we're actually worth something, even though a third of our land is undevelopable. So how do you do that? So what I have been looking at is been looking at a carbon capture credit, right? And looking at the value, the fact that we are providing the Commonwealth. We are the lungs of the Commonwealth. We are actually helping solve this climate crisis, right? We are, helping with the gas emissions. We're helping that, we're sequestering carbon. And that should be worth something, right? That should be worth something. We should say, we have all this land and we're bringing you to your target goal in 2050, and we deserve money for that so that we can keep this sustainable, so that we can keep families here, so that we can keep building our schools and making it affordable. So that is something I'm studying, because I really believe that we need to keep this a place that is sustainable and beautiful and conserved, but at the same time we need money. And if the state doesn't see us as the economic engine that Boston is, or Worcester or Springfield, we have something to offer. So I'm trying to find creative ways that I can go to the State House and say, hey, we got the tourism here, we have the green spaces, but we need the money and we are valuable. And the only way to bring value is to really stop this population spread that, we have this interesting affordability gap. So we have people with money coming in, right, and pushing out people that don't have money. So we have this, widening gap. And so how do we stop that? How do we make sure that we have the money from the state that can really solve that crisis, that can, subsidize renters, that can subsidize housing? So I'm very, very fascinated about that partnership and the tension between, environment and farming and economic engine. So that is something I'm really doing a deep dive. Everything I do is a deep dive. I used to be a film editor by trade. So my background actually is film. I was in the IATSE union in Los Angeles for 8 years. I worked for the different studios. And I used to edit on a bench, and I would look at a piece of film, and I would think of 24 frames per second, and I would have 1 million feet of film with a feature film, and I would have to focus on one. Literally, I would come back and I would see a frame of film, stuck to my bench, and I would have to reconstitute that in, 1 million feet of film. And the reason why I bring that up is my attention to detail is such that I can look at this one frame of film and figure out how that works into a story in terms of telling. And I am so focused on the detail, but also keeping in mind what's the bigger picture. What are the values that are, really matter in this community? So that is an example of something that, hey, I'm not the expert on this, but I know the experts who are here, and I am leaning on them. I am leaning on the farmers. I'm leaning on the environmentalists. And I say, teach me so I can advocate for you, so I can serve this community stronger.
The body of knowledge of which I'm ignorant could fill every ocean in this world. And I think that you start, to answer your question, by recognizing that. So how do you get up to speed? I get up at 5 o'clock every morning. I read, and I read, and I read, and I read. This morning, I took a Zoom. All right, we had a big day preparing for, forum and being, just the general work of campaigning. We're in kind of crunch time, as you can imagine. Chris Mason today offered this in his schedule. He is the guy that is managing the rollout of the stretch code, the advanced stretch codes. Both the base stretch code and the stretch code is basically how you build new buildings. And there's a trade-off. With a new building, the more you kind of move toward net zero, the better it is for climate, but the more the costs go up. So understanding the trade-offs. It's not just that. It's understanding the trade-offs. I learned all this today, literally. Understanding the trade-offs between the impacts of heat pumps on older houses and how you have to invest in insulation, really good insulation before they'll ever work. My house is from 1910. A lot of the housing stock in the Berkshires is really old. So how do you green up housing here between new housing, renovations, old housing? I learned that today because I took a half an hour to meet with a guy named Chris Mason. I spent a lot of time thinking about the economy around here, because we have some really. It turns out the state has a Department of Economic Research. I don't know if any of you have ever been to their website. It is fascinating, the statistics that they have on every single town in this county. Like, did you know every town in this district has dangerously low unemployment? All right. Now like I said, I went to school in economics. My first job was in economics. There's something called NAIRU, which is the non-accelerated inflation rate of unemployment. I won't even bore you with the definition, but the bottom line is this: if inflation is around 5%, not inflation, unemployment is around 5%, that's kind of considered 4 to 5% is healthy. When it gets down to 1 or 2%, things stop working. People can't fill jobs. And when they do fill them, they're untrained workers who are not experts in that field. Literally economies fall apart when you have unemployment that's too high or unemployment too low. So I went and spent last week, an hour. I looked at every single town unemployment rate. Because you know what? It's relevant. Because here's the thing. If you need to fill jobs, but you also want to bring in better paying jobs, because we have a problem with middle class jobs here. All right, we do. We got a lot of service jobs and not a lot of jobs you can raise a family in. So on the one hand, you want to attract those really good middle class paying jobs. On the other hand, if unemployment is too low, you end up with a situation where you don't have the people to fill those jobs. So you got to have things like housing solutions and all the rest of it. You do the work to learn about things, and I will use any tool at my disposal. I will use any tool at my disposal. I think experts, like Lee was saying, you find the people who can get you up to speed the quickest, like Bob Leverett with Old Growth Forest, like Chris Mason with the Stretch Code. You use AI. Some people like AI, some people don't like it. What I like the best, I'll tell you this, is Perplexity, because it gives you the source documents when you do a search. So you don't have to deal with the idiotic computer doing a summary. It gives you the 8 documents that it got the summary from, and you can go read them for yourself. You use every single tool at your disposal to get up to speed as quick as you can so you can make an informed decision. Thanks.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yes, on the subject, well, first of all, I'm an IATSE member as well. About climate and accountability, my name's Steve Butler, I live in Mill River, and we've gone through the proper channels. We've had the Conservation Board come out for many site visits, and basically have had their hands thrown up in the air that it's a state problem about erosion, riverbank erosion. I'm very fortunate I live on the banks of the Concobar River. We can go tubing, we can go trout fishing, but with all the rainfall and the way the climate is lately, it's washing away our riverbank. We don't have a low grade, ours is a steep grade, so it's hitting the bottom and the top is coming over. We lost some trees. We have about 1.5 to 2 feet of flat land left behind our 3-story farmhouse. Any more shifting is going to have tremendous, problems to the house if not lose it. So we've spent about $40,000 of our own money. So we were told to hire an engineering firm, so we had all our ducks in a row. We could present to the town, and there we go. We have a bunch of paperwork. Can't afford to get the job done. There's a lot of affluent people around. I'm not one of them. We can't just hire a company contractor to fix the riverbank or paving baskets, whatever. We just keep coming up against brick walls and need someone that can kind of knock down the barriers. The state was involved. There was funding to fix the Picatinny Falls in the state park. Somehow that happened. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but that's our situation right now. So we have tapped out our resources. We went for a home equity loan. We can't do anymore. And I'm just wondering, your thoughts on this?
So it'll be so funny. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm so used to saying, it's the state's problem, and and if I were to be in the other position of being a state rep, I would be expected to solve this problem.
Well, that's what's happened. It's also opened up a whole Pandora's box because we've had to hire biologists every time someone's on site for $600 a day because it's the wood turtle habitat.
Exactly.
Trout Unlimited's been involved. They have funding, but not for our project. So, I don't want this. We've had the house for just over 5 years. I'd like to leave it for my son and or something. Yeah. Yes. So, and at the barn, it's even closer. The edge of the barn is looking down the bank.
So, and I'll try to keep it short because you're probably looking at me. I got the eye. Couple things. Yes, the state has, funding for erosion, for culverts, for mitigating climate change. That is baked into a lot of the legislation that's current and coming up super. So our job, and I'm speaking as a select board member and hopefully a state rep, is that we have to trust the local providers that they really know where the pressure points are. So we have Housatonic Valley Association, we have the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. So we have local agencies and local government entities. We have nonprofits saying hey, this is a problem. So erosion's problem. We need to fix our culverts. They're aging. They're too small. This not only is this a climate crisis, but this really affects homeowners. So, if something, if the culvert doesn't work, it's going to flood the road and it's going to flood your basement. So, really what I find is that, you identify what the state has and you make sure that the municipalities have the tools, have the technical assistance. So if you don't have an assistant town manager, if you don't have someone writing grants, right? The state should really make sure that there's money there to train the municipal employees, the staff, to say, hey, you know what, by the way, there's, federal money that's being trickled down to the state, and if you were to apply for this, your town would have money to fix the erosion problems, to fix the culverts. And, there very well might be money out there. I certainly know that the more that you dig, you'll say, oh, actually, there's a piece of legislation about culverts, and guess what? There's a grant. And, I know that there's grants out there, and there's many, many grants. It takes time, and then they're competitive, and a lot of time they have matching requirements, right? So it's not just applying for a grant and saying, hey, free money. It's taking the time, having the technical assistance, and knowing that a lot of times they're the matches. And what I would say to you is, the research, hopefully you would be able to lean on a nonprofit, you would be able to lean on, a regional commission, lean on, Housatonic Valley Association, whoever, or BEAT, right? Whoever's really following this. And what I will say is, there's a lot of legislative briefings. I've been on quite a bit just because I'm very interested in some particularly measures. And they have legislative briefings if you're lucky to be invited to them. And what they'll do is they'll connect what's happening in the real world with legislation. So let's say you come to that and you say, hey, we have a problem with culverts and we need to invest in culverts because it's flooding our, housing. It's wildlife can't survive. So you kind of connect the problem to legislation. And that's really what I'm hearing you say is that, I need help. I need help, I need money, I need technical assistance, I need to know where I go. And so that's really one of the roles of the state rep is to direct you and say, hey, there is a grant, but you have to go through the state, and you have to go through your town, and your town needs technical assistance, and your technical assistance needs a matching grant, and to connect the dots. So yes, but I would love to talk to you more about that.
All right, so a couple things. One, I think this is an emergency situation, not a legislation situation. And a couple of people I would suggest you talk to. Chris Marsden, I can get you his number. He is the emergency services guy for Berkshire County. He used to be our facilities manager in Stockbridge. I know him pretty well. I think that there's folks in the federal funds infrastructure office. What I would look at is the intersection between flooding and climate change. There's a great deal of emergency funding available at the state and federal level. In fact, the climate bill includes hundreds of millions of dollars, is to my understanding. I don't completely remember, but it is a giant pot of money for exactly the kind of emergencies that you face. This is not a situation where it's a grant situation. This is an emergency management situation. If you've got a foot and a half left, give me your name again. Steve. My number is 413-441-5231. Feel free to call me tomorrow, and I will hook you up with Roger Brunell at the Federal Funds Infrastructure Office. Just ask questions. Chris Marsden. I think that you got to look at emergency services. You got to look at the people in the Energy and Environmental Affairs Office, which is basically they run climate. They're going to know where the pots of money are, but you're looking for emergency money. You are one bad flood, you're one bad rainstorm away from losing your house. that is an emergency. And this is not something, this just happened in a little bit east of here where you had that terrible flooding that caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. All right, this is something the state knows how to deal with, and you don't have to wait till you lose your house before you can deal with it. I hope. But I think that part of the job here is constituent services, and this strikes me as a constituent services issue that you should try to get some help on. And to the degree that, call me tomorrow, to the degree that I can help put you in touch with some people, I'd be happy to.
We'll be asking if you remember again.
Yeah. Tell me, it's all over the internet. Just search, go to my website. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, you can speak to each other when we're finished. I'm sorry to cut you off. You want to keep going? Sir?
My big worry at the present, and it seems like I always have a worry, and my big one, and both of you are board members, is the Scenic Mountain Act.
Yeah.
And if we don't put teeth in that, it's going to be goodbye Berkshires. The sign out here in our green says where the Berkshires began. Well, it's going to be a sign out there that says where the Berkshires got destroyed. And the people that we can't kind of relate to them, but they have money enough to park a trophy house or take an ego trip and right up the ridge lines of the hills here that we all appreciate. And to me, we're at a crossroads. There seems to be an apathy in our town that worries me. And we need to put teeth in it. And I know you two, I'm sure, probably wrestle with it, but I think we have more at stake down here in our town, our Sheffield, than maybe some of the other towns. And we have more to preserve, a lot more stake. And if that it is starting to happen. My son looked up one project, and it's supposed to be a project that's going to get flipped, and it's up on top of a hill. Anyway, if that happens, I'm going to have a tear in my eye, I'll tell you.
Mm. What the project that you're talking about? So it's not within this Scenic Mountain Act. It's being. Could you explain that?
Well, it seems like the Scenic Mountain Act hasn't really been enacted here in our town because it doesn't have all the specifics. And the doors appear to be open for this kind of development if they don't make that effort to put the real teeth in it.
Yeah.
Preserve the ridge lines and preserve the slopes. Otherwise, you're going to drive up the road and you're going to have this graffiti looking at it.
Yeah. I mean, the Scenic Mountain Act is an act, and we need to make sure that it's enforced. I mean, that's number one. So it's. I know that if there's any tree cutting or if there's any development, the first thing you talk to is your conservation agent, and you talk to your town and say, they have maps so you can actually see. I mean, you could go into Sheffield and see where the Scenic Mountain Act covers. So if someone is, cutting down trees or putting up wooden turbines, I mean, there is, action that you can do as a citizen. Okay. Okay. What I'd have to, talk to you separately about that. I do know in Great Barrington that it's something that's on our radar all the time, and I've actually called a good few times when I've seen houses go up and trees come down, and I say, well, there's a problem there. Those trees were there, and now it's gone, and we are using that act to make sure that the people that are not following the rules, either have to replant and they get fined. So that is very, very something. And coming back to the bigger point of, I think the Berkshires are ripe for developers and for people that see it as cheap land and look at all this open space, and we need to protect our land. I mean, the climate crisis is real, and we have this kind of in-migration and we have this migration, and we need to kind of stand firm and say, this actually matters. You're not going to destroy our mountains, you're not going to destroy our air, you're not going to destroy our water. So we have such value in the Berkshires, and you need strong advocates in the State House, and I would definitely do that.
So couple things. One, the question was enforcement of the Scenic Mountain Act. Scenic Mountain Act is state law. It has been for a long time. And one of the challenges we have in our small towns, frankly, is that these boards tend to be volunteer, of course. Not all the towns have a conservation agent. If your town doesn't have one, you should insist they do. Their job is to enforce these laws. This is sort of like there's an oops, I'm sorry, kind of approach to some of these challenges. Oh, I didn't realize I couldn't cut down that 3 acres at the top of the mountain. Oops, I'm sorry. All right. The fact is, you got to educate the landowners, and you've got to make sure that there is enforcement and consequences. It's just like the polluters. I've advocated for, when people, we had a situation in Stockbridge where someone was threatening to cut an area out. And while I was on the Conservation Commission, I suggested that, every tree was a $300 because the bylaw allows us to charge $300 a day. And the enforcement agent is a Conservation Commission. And until you replant that tree, if you cut it down, you're going to pay $300 a day per tree. And guess what? They didn't cut them down. You're going to have to be, I hate being a jerk most of the time, but once in a while, you got to be a jerk. And you got to make sure people understand who think that they're above the rules, that they're not. And it takes resolve to do that. And I would encourage your town leadership and all of our town's leadership to recognize that you're absolutely right. Someone's, 300, if you approach the fine as well, it's like, we're going to give you a $2,000 fine for someone building a $5 million house. They're not going to care less. You got to make it so expensive if they break the rules that they won't break the rules. I think that also, by the way, may be our secret weapon with some of the conflicting state laws around solar, for example, that we're going to take a look at. There's only one Berkshire Scenic Mountain Act. Anyway.
Thank you. We're running a little short on time. I was going to ask, are you willing to keep going if we can keep going? Are there more questions from the audience? Maggie, is it okay if we run a little longer? Yes? Sort of okay that we keep going.
We could do the 7th and extract and go for another 2.
I have a bigger question about employment. You were talking about having those middle class jobs. My daughter attended Monument Mountain High School, and she's now at the age where she wants to come home, and her friends are talking about coming home. They like growing up here. They want to raise their children here. They need jobs, and they need good jobs. And for the life of me, I've never understood why there's tons of tech at RPI in Troy, New York, and tons of tech in Boston, where it costs ridiculous amounts of money to live. And here we have this beautiful place that might not have the population that you need, but can certainly attract the population that you need. And I'm wondering how you both can speak to that about bringing jobs to this area that would boost that middle class, would bring our young kids home, and make a more diverse population.
So I can absolutely 100% speak to this. So I have a 23-year-old, a 21-year-old, and a 19-year-old. So my oldest son just graduated UMass in May, and he's a chemistry major. He had worked at Berkshire Sterile when he was in high school, did the night shift, did the cleaning. And when he graduated as a chemistry student, I was hoping that he would return and stay here. He was in Amherst. And a couple things. He didn't want to stay home, right? He didn't want to live with mom. Housing was too unaffordable. Housing was unaffordable. And he didn't have transportation. So for us to go from Great Barrington to Lee, it didn't work. And thank goodness he was interviewing, and he was hired by Moderna in Norwood. And what's interesting about that is he's now working at Moderna. So my hope that he would stay home, my son, and work locally for Boyd Technologies, or, it's biotechnology, right? In pharma. He ended up taking this job in Moderna. And what was interesting, it was very, very quick. And all of a sudden, he needed a car, he needed affordable housing, that he could afford, and he had a job. So what was interesting is immediately we went for looking for housing. And what struck me in Norwood is that They have these, complexes, these managed complexes for these young professionals that are coming out trained to work. Moderna, has one thing called One Upland, and if you ever look at it, it's laid out. So they have the infrastructure. Immediately he was able to find. We went and we found an apartment within probably an hour. Right, beautiful apartment. I gave him my car, my old 2015 Subaru, 200,000 miles, and they have a T-stop right in this complex that goes into Boston. So and he makes more money than me now. So how do you, which isn't hard, but how do you compete with that? And that's why I'm so fascinated by, because that's a good example of a person that went to Monument, right, and really wanted to stay here. But was pulled out because the infrastructure is such in Boston and all these cities that they have the public transportation, they have the housing that's affordable, that's affordable doing, and they have the infrastructure. So how do we do that is really the key, and that's a whole thing. But really, one of the things I'm focusing on is the pipeline, right? So, we have this pipeline that's existing between the Berkshires and Albany, in technology, advanced manufacturing, biotechnology, pharma, right? So we are strengthening this. And, one of the passions I have is economic development. I'm on the One Berkshire board of directors. I am an advisor for the Berkshire Blueprint, which is the strategy, a 10-year strategy on where we're going to go. I'm a member of the Berkshire Leadership Impact Trust. So this is all big picture about how do we retain our young people, how do we retain the workforce. So it's a combination. It's transportation, right? It's affordable housing. It's having a pipeline that when they get out of school, that they have been cultivated, that they have done internships, that they've had vocational training, that it's a win-win. So the nurses are doing a great job, right? We have nursing programs in MCLA, we have nursing programs at BCC, and that's training kids while they're in college and keeping them here, keeping them at BMC, keeping them at Fairview, and that's great because they are locked in. And I think really the key is, why they're engaged, why they're going to school here, find their passions, find their interests, find the challenges. Is it, transportation? Is it not having, a mentor? Is it not having a job? And really cultivating that early on so that they're not enticed to leave the Berkshires. But, I could go on about the struggles I've had as a parent to 3 kids looking for work and hoping that they stay in the Berkshires and going through Monument. So I'll be happy to talk to you after that.
All right. I have a background in creating jobs. I founded several companies in Boston, raised, tens of millions of dollars in capital to do that. The fact is that we need to look at GE left here in the 80s. They took with them 16,000 middle-class jobs. Part of the challenge is that not only did those jobs go, but a lot of the supporting industries, supporting jobs around them went. So we ended up with a really kind of a more of an income inequality situation here in the Berkshires, where we have a lot of good service jobs, not bad jobs, but not enough to raise a family on. And then we have a lot of really wealthy, affluent folks who are often just seasonal residents or retirees. And that's good. That's one of the reasons we have such an aging population. We don't have those middle class jobs. The average age in a lot of the towns in South County is in the 60s. The average age in Massachusetts is 39. So how do we fix that? First thing we do is we recognize that we're going to have to actively recruit some companies to consider a move out here. A woman named Yvonne Howe is the executive secretary of economic development for the state. She has 2 employees whose job it is to recruit companies or keep companies here in Massachusetts when they scale from manufacturing, when they scale from the idea, like the startup, to manufacturing. A place like North Carolina has 10 times as many people working on North Carolina. We need to even the playing field a little bit in terms of keeping companies here. The second thing we need to do is we need to recognize that even if we scale that up at the state level, we are not doing a good job of pitching the Berkshires to attract those companies. I'm not talking about replacing GE with 10,000 jobs, like another giant General Dynamics. I'm talking about the small climate tech companies that we're going to invest $1 billion of your taxpayer money to fund that might bring 25 manufacturing jobs, because we're going to have to make sure there's housing, make sure there's employees, and basically kind of juggle them together. I was talking to a guy that is at, there's 2 Massachusetts organizations that do basically grants or micro loans for small businesses. All right, one of the few ways, 50% of the kids in South County don't go to college or finish college. 50%, which is one of the reasons, by the way, we need vocational out here. All right, one of the few paths that a lot of these kids have to stay in here and be able to raise a family here is being self-employed. Because if you're a landscaper, a plumber, or an HVAC operator, or whatever they call them, or an electrician, you actually can make some serious money. One of the kids that I know who did the best runs a little paving company now, Tri-Town, a guy named Wayne. All right. The fact is that these self-employment is a great model to get there. I talked to him. He was like, we don't do any deals in Western Mass. Both of them. I called both of them 2 days ago to talk about this exact issue. So microloans. So somebody wants to start a business for the first time, and the state has actually 2 funds to do that, and they actually focus on people with a slightly worse credit score than is bankable, or who haven't been in business for the couple of years that a bank typically relies on. So understanding how we do that, but one of the problems with that is the interest rate is 8.5%. They only do like $20-30 million in loans a year for the whole state, and they're charging 8.5%. To bring it down to 2%. It would cost them almost nothing, and it would let those kids start a business and not have an owner's payment. So being smart about capital, being smart about pitching. But I'll tell you this, all right? When you have a VC come into your deal, you've already pitched 5. You closed maybe 1 out of 5 or 6, and that's after 1 out of 2,000 got the lead investor. All right, I know how to pitch owners of companies, and I know how to pitch investors, the people who fund those companies, and I will make it my personal mission to recruit companies to come out here in the Berkshires. This is something I've spent a career doing, and I think that this is something where we can't expect them to come to us. A lot of people have never even heard of it out here. We got 100 empty mills out here. Greylock Mill, it can handle a manufacturing facility of almost 300 employees. It's been empty for 10 years in Lee. There's 100 more like it in the Berkshires. Why we're not reinvigorating the Berkshires with manufacturing jobs is beyond me.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, but we do have to wrap up now, I was just told.
Thank you.
So can we have a round of applause for our candidates? That was excellent.
Thanks for coming.
So, thank you, everyone, for coming. And don't forget the primary is September the 3rd. Don't forget to vote.